Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel Let's Talk Boxing. In terms of this video, we're going to cover another topic which is very popular on this channel, and that's us trying to think outside the box and get into a bit of a psychological deep dive. We're going to consider the approaches that each fighter used in order to engage in psychological warfare. What areas did they target for their mind games? Were they successful? Did anything backfire? And as I said, because we always think outside the box, I believe I'm going to come up with a few angles that you might not have thought of before. So the first area I want us to talk about is the concept of levels. Each guy looking to essentially undermine the level of the other guy. This is pretty standard stuff, but let's consider how they went about doing it. Chris Eubank Jr. first came out and he said, I weighed in lighter than Liam yesterday, so Liam's the bigger man. He's obviously being sarcastic here, and this is a reference to the fact that Liam had been saying that had they been the same size, this would not be a competitive fight. The only advantage Eubank has got is that he's the bigger man. And so he's almost saying to Liam Smith here, if I'm the naturally bigger man and I'm still coming in lighter, what's your preparation been like? Let's not forget that Eubank all along has been saying that the reason that Liam Smith has gotten this grey hair is because of his diet, and he's not been looking after himself properly and things like that. It's essentially aged him. He goes on to say, I'm a solid 44 to 45%. I'll be 50% on the night, and that will be enough. Now, he's been rolling with this gimmick since the whole Conor Ben fight, of course, and he's continued with it. And initially it was very funny. It's becoming a little bit of a consistent gimmick now, which doesn't draw the same sort of laughs. Nonetheless, Liam Smith has been very keen on trying to approach this from the perspective of facts. And he's been saying, this is rubbish what you're saying. You know, your own trainers are saying that you're coming in at 100%, that you're in great shape, what you're talking about. And okay, then if you're going to come in at 50%, I'll come in at 70. But he's almost trying to explain it away from a factual perspective. We all know that Eubank's not coming in at 40 to 55%. We know he's going to come out there to be the best he can be. So the way I personally would have approached this if I was Liam Smith, I would have just said, well, listen, it makes no difference. Coming at 50, 100%, you're getting splattered anyway, so it makes no difference what you come in as. I'm coming in at 100% and you're in trouble. Then I would never, ever address it again. I would just roll my eyes at it. Instead, because he continues to almost justify the fact that he's right and that Eubank's talking rubbish, he's almost on the defensive consistently. At least that's how I've been taking it. Nonetheless, that factual approach, that attempt to try and stick through the line of facts has served him quite well. He came out and he said, I've fought better fighters than Chris, so how can he possibly get under my skin? And he has indeed fought the likes of Canelo Alvarez, who is, of course, a modern-day great, a pound-for-pound king. So there's no way you can talk down to me and get under my skin. You're irrelevant to me, essentially. And he continued with this line when he started to talk about the IBO championship. He basically brought up the allegation that Mo, the announcer, was asked to introduce Chris Eubank Jr. as a former IBO and WBA champion. Now, the IBO title is not one of the titles of the four main governing bodies. A who's who of boxing, great champions have held the belt, but it's a secondary sort of title. It's not considered a legitimate world title by most people. Now, as for the WBA title, Chris Eubank Jr. was an interim WBA title holder. An interim title will essentially earn you a shot at a legitimate top title. It's like making you the #1 contender in essence. It's not a legitimate world title. So once again, he's questioning the level of Eubank, but he's also planting these seeds that Eubank is a fraud. And this is something that will become more prevalent as this video moves on. But he also mentions the fact that you call me as just another Smith. The fact of the matter is, you lost to George Groves in the World Boxing Super Series in the semi-final, which prevented you from getting the opportunity to fight the other Smith. And that's a good thing, because you would have got seriously hurt against Callum. And Eubank tried to deflect this by saying, well, okay, so you're telling me you're not as good as your brother. That's okay, but it's got nothing to do with your brother, this fight. It's got to do with you, and you're getting roasted on Saturday. So he's tried to deflect and direct away from that. But the fact of the matter is, he's basically telling Chris, you're not as good as you rate yourself. You're not what you portray yourself to be. You're not a legitimate world champion. You are essentially a fraud. And in terms of that concept of a fraud, that became another area for a battleground. This is where things got really spicy, okay? It started off with Chris Eubank Jr. basically telling him, You don't slide into another man's DMs. I'm used to seeing girls in my DMs. I'm not used to seeing guys there. And at this point, Liam Smith decides to go full out. And this is where things got a little bit controversial. He said, you're going on about girls, mate, but has anyone in this room ever seen you with a girl? Have you got something to tell us? I mean, you're 33 years old. You've told us about wanting to have kids. No one's ever seen you with a girl. We've seen you in Lamborghinis with Neymar. Is there something you want to tell us? Now, the insinuation quite clearly here is that Chris Eubank Jr. is a homosexual. Chris Eubank Jr., in my opinion, sets a bit of a trap here. And he says to him, is there something you want to ask me directly? You can either slide into my DMs or you can just ask me right here. Now, he may be hoping that Liam Smith says something very controversial here. It will cause a backlash and all of the stress that will then come with that. I mean, it did cause a backlash and we'll get to that in a moment. But he doesn't bite up and say anything here that is too controversial. But they do carry on talking, and Liam Smith starts to talk about his hair and his beard and alleged transplants. We'll get to that in a moment because that is significant here. But after all of that, Chris Eubank Jr. goes back to saying, listen, if you want to get dark and personal with it, I've heard from multiple sources that you cheat on your wife on occasion. Oh my word, I couldn't believe he dropped that one. Liam Smith then looks down, laughing, trying to almost make out like, you know, it just rolled off my back. That was a nothing comment, don't be silly. And then goes back to talking about Chris Eubank Jr.'s hair. But this clearly got through, in my opinion, from Chris Eubank Jr. In fact, up until this point, I felt that it was Liam Smith that was winning these exchanges. He was doing a good job of undermining the achievements of Chris Eubank Jr. He was doing a good job of portraying him as delusional. But at this point, things change. And I'll explain why I believe this is a very significant moment in a second. But this backlash has been caused because people are assuming that Liam Smith was essentially saying something homophobic. I personally don't see the evidence for that at all. For me, it was a consistent line of questioning, so to speak, to portray Eubank as a fraud. He did not use gay as an insult. He did not use it as a slur. He was talking about how Eubank has portrayed himself to the world in a particular light that is untrue. As you can see there from the alleged hairline and beard before this allegation of him having microblading or whatever it's called, the tattoo basically on the scalp, which makes it look like you've got a hairline when you've actually lost your hair, and also has accused him of having a beard transplant in Turkey. And you can see the alleged before pictures there and the alleged after pictures. And he actually says after this, Liam Smith, you're a fraud. IBO champion, your hair, your beard, you're a fraud. In other words, what he's saying to him is not that I'm looking down on you or insulting you for being homosexual. What he's basically saying is you're a fake champion. You're a fake tough guy that thinks he's superior to the Smiths. You're fake with your persona. You've portrayed yourself as this womanizer that can get women here, there and everywhere in your inbox. You're not even interested in women. And your hair's fake, your beard's fake. Everything about you's fake. That's the approach that he's taken. That's the narrative. But it has nonetheless caused a backlash. Now, regardless of where you stand on that, the fact of the matter is, the comment aimed at his wife and him cheating on her, listen, for all we know, Liam Smith is the most loyal man, very close to his wife. She's just going to brush it all off, say there's nothing there whatsoever. But there may very well be a part of her who's thinking this is a young athlete, world-class athlete, travels the world, you know, I might just start having a little peek over his shoulder. Let me take a little look at that phone next time he's texting with a smirk on his face. How about I confront him and I ask him, why would he say that? What has he heard? And can that add added stress to the situation during fight week? If the aim of a mind game is to get under the skin of your opponent, to disrupt their preparations, if you're able to cause some distress in the Smith household, yeah, listen, you might not consider it to be a moral approach to take, but nonetheless, it's probably effective. And if you're talking about what's fair and what's just, listen, I personally have been raised in an environment, in a background where there was a culture of silence. You grew up in a very rough area. You knew that other people's business was other people's business. You do not talk. So I would never talk about the alleged extramarital affairs of anybody or the alleged sexuality of another fighter or anything like that. I would never go down that route. But here's the thing. In theory, one guy exposed the secret of another guy that could potentially alter the trajectory of his life. And the other guy, in return, exposed a supposed secret of the other guy that could potentially change the trajectory of their life. So whilst I don't agree with either of it, it's kind of like a tit for tat type of thing. Another area that was targeted was territorial beef. At least that's how I saw it. You see, Chris Eubank Jr. said, things in the UK are hard at the moment. I can only imagine how hard it is in Liverpool right now. Liam has got a responsibility. He's got the pressure. There are a lot of unemployed Liverpudlians out there that are looking for a hero. It's his job to help them out. So the pressure is really on him, not on me. Now, at first glance, this could just be looking to shift over the pressure to Liam Smith and saying, you're the one that's got people to fight for. You're going to have the weight of their expectations on your shoulder. But I actually think there's a lot more to it than this, because he also goes on to say, I used to think Tony Bellew was the biggest a-hole to come out of Liverpool, but Liam has definitely taken that #1 spot. And did you really expect Tony Bellew to not respond? He responded on Twitter to say, he's correct. I am Liverpool's biggest a-hole, but I'm the a-hole that's won far more than he ever will. He also needs to return that black belt he parades around back to Brighton Pier Arcades where he won it. So again, you're seeing Tony Bellew seeking to undermine the achievements of Chris Eubank Jr. But why do you think Eubank has targeted the city of Liverpool in those separate comments? To me, it comes across as somebody who's acutely aware that the fight is occurring in Manchester. Now, Manchester and Liverpool have a sporting rivalry due to football, Manchester United and Liverpool Football Club. And as a result of that, I feel as though maybe he's trying to tap into that. Smith, my opponent, is a Liverpool fan and he's coming to Manchester, to your territory, to fight me. Let's get behind me and silence this Liverpudlian, this arrogant scouser. That's how he's trying to put it across, I believe, in order to try and win over some public support in Manchester. Because if this is a high-octane, full-on action affair, you don't want the crowd roaring all of your opponent's punches and not yours. Because if it does go to the scorecards, that's the sort of thing that could potentially sway the judges. That's how I've interpreted that. Let me know what you think. Now, finally, let's talk about one more area that I felt was key, and that's the trainers and their little chess playing. I actually thought Joe McNally in particular came out with a masterclass of an approach, and I want to talk about exactly how I feel he did that, because he was planting seeds of doubt in the Eubank camp in a very, very intelligent way. He was asked what he thought about this idea that Chris Eubank Jr. was caught between two styles since taking on Roy Jones Jr. He says, yeah, you know, he's got a fantastic coach in Ronnie Davis in the corner, and Roy being Roy, he's a legend in the sport. I can't comment. I haven't looked too much into his coaching, but I respect the two of them. Ronnie Davis is a legend, and I'm assuming that Chris Eubank Jr. listens to him religiously. You know, Roy's there for a bit of guidance, and I'm sure Ronnie's left no stone unturned for Junior's preparation. Now, let's just think about what Joe McNally has just done here. He basically undermined Roy Jones Jr. You're a terrific fighter, but we don't know what you're like as a trainer yet. This is an unknown quantity we're talking about here. And I'm sure that Chris Eubank Jr. listens to Ronnie Davis religiously because he is a top-class trainer. Well, what do we all know? We all know that Roy Jones is the man that's come in to take the reins. He's the main trainer. And we also know that Ronnie Davis was ignored by Eubank for years. You remember that famous moment where Eubank's sitting in the corner and Ronnie Davis is trying to give him advice and he's not even listening. He's just telling him, be quiet, shut up, be quiet, or whatever it is he said to him. He basically told him to shut his trap, publicly embarrassing him. He's not listening to Ronnie Davis. For years, he used to say that he needed a guy like Roy Jones Jr. because I know he's been there, he's done that, so he can actually teach me something. A lot of these other guys can't teach me anything. And he's been talking about some high-level trainers when he's been saying this. So think about what Joe McNally has done here. Let's use an analogy to explain this. He's basically said, you have the equivalent of a classical treasure, a myrtle wreath made of gold, beautiful and unbelievably valuable. And what have you done with this piece of exquisite brilliance? Have you valued it? Have you relied upon that as part of your inheritance, so to speak? No, what did you do? You went and stuck it in some dingy, dark attic, dust-filled, rats and mice running around, exposed to moisture. You're ruining that piece of knowledge. You haven't learned from it. You haven't looked at this beautiful wreath and thought, this is how I want to embellish my own artistry. Instead, you went and bought yourself the most expensive metal detector you could find. You went down to Brighton Beach. You started looking there among the pebbles and you pulled out this gold ring. And yes, it looks beautiful. It looks like an antique ring, gold, and set upon it are these clusters of beautiful diamond looking stones. Great clarity, a brilliant cut, glistening in the sunshine. It looks beautiful. But Chris, are you sure this is as valuable a gem, a valuable a treasure as that wreath that you've got hidden in the attic? What if they're not diamonds, Chris? What if they're zirconias? And what if that ring is therefore worthless? You see, your mouth, Chris, has written checks that your body can't cash because you have bet your inheritance not on what you should know is proven as a trainer in Ronnie Davis, aka the wreath. You've bet your inheritance on this little ring that you went and found on Brighton Beach. You see that? It's a masterclass to put doubt in the mind of Chris Eubank Jr. from Joe McNally. And Roy Jones decided after that he needed to start verbally flexing. He needed to deflect from this. And he started to say, Chris Eubank brought me in to make him into the perfect fighter, the complete fighter. And I've done that. I've turned him into a complete fighter. Before he could fight one way. Now he can outbox you or he can outfight you. So Roy Jones then goes on to try and even explain himself as a trainer by talking about his experiences as a fighter. You've got Roy Jones Jr., one of the greatest to ever do it, on the ropes trying to prove himself. And he's saying, I've been in all kinds of fights where I had to stalk guys, where I had to box, where I had to go toe-to-toe. So just because I was one type of fighter doesn't mean you can't teach someone to be a complete fighter. And that's what I've done with Eubank. He's justifying his existence. In other words, he's on the defensive. But in the mind of Chris Eubank Jr., he may very well be wondering, Roy Jones knows a lot. He's a great fighter. A lot of people have been saying I'm caught between two styles. I'm a pound shop Roy Jones and so on and so forth. Is he really proven though as a trainer? That's a great little move from McNally, in my humble opinion. Let me know what you think, ladies and gents. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.